Lone Cowboy found an abandoned mail-order bride in the storm. Not knowing hope was all she had left. By the time Silas Mercer saw the woman in the road, he thought she was already dead. The storm had turned the Montana Valley into a river of mud and rain. Water ran down the hillsides in dark streams. Wind bent the tall grass flat and slapped at Silas's coat like it wanted to drag him off his horse. He had lived through plenty of storms, but this one felt mean. The kind that did not care what it destroyed. Then he saw her. A small figure half fallen in the mud beside the road, bent over a worn little valise she held with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her from blowing away. Silas pulled hard on the reins. His horse slowed, snorting against the rain. For a moment he just stared. The woman's dress was soaked so badly it clung to her legs. Mud covered the hem. Her shoes were split open at the toes, and through the torn leather he could see the skin of her feet. Her hair, once probably neat and pinned up proper, hung wet against her cheeks. When she lifted her face, her eyes looked empty in a way that unsettled him more than the storm did. Not wild, not broken, just emptied out. "Ma'am," Silas called over the rain. "You hurt." She blinked up at him like she had forgotten what a man's voice sounded like. Then she said the strangest thing he had heard in years. "I don't know anymore." Those words hit him harder than they should have. Silas had spent 7 years teaching himself not to get tangled in anybody else's sorrow. He lived 1 mile off the road for a reason. His cabin was quiet. His days were simple: work the land, feed the horse. Mend what broke, sleep, wake, repeat. A man who stayed alone long enough could almost believe pain had forgotten where he lived. Almost. He looked back toward town. 5 miles of road, all mud and rain and people. Then he looked toward home. 1 mile, one warm stove, one dry roof. The woman swayed where she sat. Her fingers tightened on the handle of that valise as if even now she expected someone to take it from her. Silas reached down his hand. "Come on." She stared at it for half a second too long, like kindness had become something she no longer trusted. Then at last she let go of the valise with one hand and placed her cold fingers in his palm. He pulled her up behind him onto the horse, took the valise from her, and turned toward the cabin without another word. The ride back was slow. Rain soaked through both of them. Her body shivered against his back in small, violent tremors. She tried hard not to lean on him, and that told Silas more about her than anything else could have. A woman half frozen and close to dropping, still worried about being a burden. By the time they reached the cabin, the yard had turned to slick black mud. Silas swung down first and helped her off the horse. She nearly stumbled when her feet touched the ground, but she caught herself. Pride, he noticed, was one thing the storm had not washed out of her. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood smoke, old coffee, and neglect. Silas noticed the place through her eyes the second she stepped in. The unwashed dishes in the basin, dust thick along the window ledge, a boot left on its side near the door, a blanket half fallen off the chair where he had slept the night before instead of using the bed. He had stopped seeing the mess long ago. Now, all at once, he saw every inch of it. He set her valise down near the stove and grabbed a wool blanket from the peg by the bed. "Take this," he said, holding it out. She took it carefully, wrapping it around her shoulders without speaking. Silas knelt at the stove and fed enkindling until the flame grew stronger. Then he poured black coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Her hands trembled so badly the cup rattled against the saucer. She had not eaten enough in days. That much was clear. Silas cut 2 thick slices of bread and set them on the table with a small piece of cheese. She looked at the food, then at him. "I don't take charity." Her voice was low, gentle, worn out. Silas pulled out a chair. "Then call it staying alive." For a second he thought she might argue. Instead she sat. Steam rose from her clothes as the fire dried them. The smell of wet wool filled the room. For a long minute the only sounds were the rain on the roof and the small clink of the cup against her teeth. Then she spoke. "My name is Faith Turner." Silas nodded once. "Silas Mercer." She looked down into the coffee as if she might find steadiness there. "I came from Ohio." Silas sat across from her. "My folks died when I was 17, she said. "Scarlet fever." both of them in the same week. Something in her voice told him this was not a story she told often, not because it hurt too much anymore, because she had run out of people worth telling. I worked in a sewing factory after that, she went on. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Then I saw an advertisement in a newspaper. Silas stayed still. A man in Montana was looking for a wife, she said. A rancher. He wrote that he was sincere, hardworking, God-fearing. He said he wanted a real home with a real woman, not just someone pretty to sit in a parlor. A bitter kind of understanding settled in Silas before she said another word. We wrote letters for 3 months, Faith whispered. He said he would meet me at the Willow Creek depot. Said he'd be wearing a blue kerchief so I would know him. Her fingers tightened around the cup. I sold everything I had for the train ticket. Silas looked at her valise in the corner. That little case was all that remained of a whole life. She gave a tired, humorless smile. I waited 2 days on a bench at the depot. The rain hit the roof harder. He never came. Silas felt something heavy and ugly rise in his chest. I asked at the station if anyone knew him. Nobody did, so I found the letters. I read the return address again. Willow Creek. I thought maybe there had been trouble, maybe he was hurt, maybe I had the wrong day. She looked down at her broken shoes, so I started walking. How far? 40 miles in 3 days. Silas let out a slow breath through his nose. One woman gave me bread yesterday morning, Faith said. That was all. She reached for the valise, drew it closer, and opened it. Inside were 3 dresses folded small, 1 brush, a handkerchief, and a stack of letters tied with kitchen string. She set the letters on the table between them. His name was James Hollister. Silas froze. The name struck him clean through. Faith saw it happen. You know him. Silas looked at the letters, then at her face. He nodded once. James Hollister runs the mercantile in Willow Creek. For one heartbeat she did not react. Then slowly she asked, is he a rancher? No. The room felt smaller. Faith's fingers stayed flat against the letters, as if she needed them to hold her up one last time. Silas wished in that moment that the man were standing in front of him. Faith asked the next question without blinking. Is he married? Silas gave her the truth because there was no mercy in softening it. Yes. That was the word that did it, not loud, not cruel, just final. She sat very still. Her face did not crumple. No tears came. Her mouth trembled once and then steadied. She untied the kitchen string, lifted the letters, and without a word carried them to the stove. Silas stood halfway. Faith. But she was already feeding them into the flame. One by one. The paper curled black at the edges. The ink blurred. The promises vanished into smoke. When the last letter turned to ash, she stood there looking into the fire as if waiting for something inside her to burn away too. Silas did not know what to say, so he said the only true thing he had. You can stay here. She did not turn, as long as you need. That night he gave her the bed and took the chair by the stove. She slept hard, the kind of sleep that comes only after a body gives up fighting. Silas woke twice in the night and found himself listening for her breathing. He did not like what that meant. The next morning he rose before dawn, fed the horse, and chopped wood out behind the cabin until his hands went numb. Work usually cleared a man's mind. It did not clear his. When he came back in, something stopped him cold. The basin was empty. The dishes were clean and stacked. The table had been wiped down. And from the stove came a smell so warm and unexpected it nearly knocked the air out of him. Cornbread. Faith stood with her hair pinned up and one of his old aprons tied over her dress. She had rolled the sleeves past her wrists. There was flour on her hands and a faint streak of it near her cheek. She turned when she heard him. I told you, she said quietly. I don't take charity, I work for my keep. Silas set the wood by the door and looked around the room again. No one had moved through his cabin like this in 7 years. No one had made the place feel lived in. No one had made him notice how dead it had become. He sat at the table and ate in silence. The cornbread was hot and soft and tasted like memory. 5 days passed before Faith said more than a sentence at a time. But in those 5 days the cabin changed. She washed the curtains, beat the rugs outside, mended 2 shirts he had thrown in a corner months ago, swept out the dust from under the bed, and found an old tin spoon he thought he had lost last winter. She moved through the place with a quiet purpose that never felt like intrusion. Silas told himself he only noticed because there was little else to look at. That was a lie. He noticed everything. The way she tucked loose hair behind one ear when she was thinking. The way she folded blankets with both hands smoothing the edges flat. The way she still woke at the smallest sound, like some part of her did not believe safety lasted. On the 10th morning, while he sat at the table with coffee, she surprised him. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "may I plant flowers by the porch?" What? The question caught him so off guard he nearly set the cup down wrong. He had not been asked permission for anything personal in years. Men in town asked to buy hay, borrow a tool, trade for oats. No one asked if they could make something beautiful beside his front steps. He looked at her. She stood straight while waiting for the answer, but he could tell the question mattered to her more than she wanted him to know. "Plant what you want," he said. That afternoon he found himself at the fence line with a hammer in hand, staring far longer than needed at a post that was not broken. Faith knelt in the dirt by the porch with an old hand spade, sleeves rolled up, placing tiny roots into the ground with careful fingers. The sun had come out warm after the rain, and it lit her hair brown and gold at once. She was humming under her breath, so softly he almost thought the wind was making the sound. Then she looked up and caught him watching. Silas straightened too fast and hit the fence post with the wrong side of the hammer. She smiled. Only a little, but enough. And for the first time since he had found her abandoned in the storm, something that felt a lot like hope stirred in the quiet place he had thought was dead for good. He did not know yet how quickly the town would try to ruin it, but trouble had already started moving toward them. And by the time it reached his door, Faith Turner would have to decide whether she believed his cabin was only shelter, or the first real place she had belonged since losing everything. By the second week, Faith no longer moved through Silas Mercer's cabin like a guest. She moved through it like someone trying very hard not to love a place that was beginning to feel like home. That was the dangerous part. Silas noticed it in small things first. The way her little valise no longer stayed close to her feet every hour of the day. The way she left her shawl on the back of the same chair each evening, as if she already trusted it would still be there in the morning. The way she opened the front door at dawn and stood a moment on the porch, breathing in the valley air like she was trying to believe it belonged to her too. He noticed because for years nothing in his life had changed unless weather or cattle forced it to. Now everything was changing. His shirts were mended. His floors were swept. His coffee was waiting some mornings before he even came in from the barn. And the flowers Faith planted by the porch had started to take hold in the dirt, small green shoots pushing up where there had only been bare ground before. Silas found that harder to look at than he should have. One evening she carried her valise into the front room, set it beside the wall near the stove, and left it there. Silas saw it the second he stepped inside. He looked from the valise to her. She was kneading bread dough at the table, sleeves rolled, loose strands of hair falling near her face. "You forgot your case," he said. Faith glanced over her shoulder and shook her head. "No." Just that one word. No. Then after a moment she added, "I'm tired of carrying it from room to room." Silas said nothing. He understood more than he let show. That valise had been her shield, her last proof that she could still leave before anything hurt too much. Setting it down did not mean she was healed. It meant she was exhausted from guarding herself. That same night after supper he found her sitting by the window with a piece of paper in her lap. "You writing another letter?" he asked. She nodded. "To a friend back in Ohio. The only one left who might still care where I ended up." Silas leaned against the doorframe. "And what are you telling her?" Faith thought about that. "That I'm alive," she said softly. "And that the worst thing that ever happened to me might not be the end of the story." Those words stayed with him long after he went out to close the chicken coop for the night. A week later they rode into Willow Creek so Faith could mail the letter. Silas had not wanted to go. He told himself it was because the wagon axle still made a bad sound on uneven ground, or because the far pasture fence needed checking, or because there was no good reason to ride into town when most of what they needed could wait another week. All of that was a lie. The truth was simpler. He knew what towns did to women alone. He knew what they did to women who did not fit where other people wanted to place them. And he knew Faith had already been judged once by strangers who never bothered to see her clearly. The closer they got to Willow Creek, the quieter she became. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, but her fingers twisted the corner of a handkerchief until it looked ready to tear. Silas glanced at her once as the first rooftops came into view. "Nobody's going to bite you." Faith tried to smile. It did not quite work. "I know," she said. "That doesn't stop them from staring." Town looked ordinary enough when they rolled in. Horses tied outside the saloon, a dog asleep beneath a wagon, two boys racing down the boardwalk like they had never heard of fear. The church steeple beyond the mercantile, the same place as always. But the second Faith stepped onto the boardwalk beside him, the air changed. People looked. Not a glance, a look. The kind that sticks. Silas felt it before she did. Then he watched her shoulders tighten just a little. Inside the mercantile, the bell above the door jingled. 3 women turned at once. And just like that, the room went quiet. Martha Perkins stood behind the counter with her hands folded over an open ledger. She had the sweetest voice in Willow Creek and the sharpest mouth when she chose to use it. Beside the flour barrel stood Mrs. Grady and her sister-in-law, both pretending they had been comparing lamp oil prices when really they had been waiting for something more interesting than their own lives. Martha Perkins smiled first. "Well now, Silas Mercer. Been a while." Silas kept his expression still. "Needed stamps." Martha's eyes moved to Faith, slowly. "And who might this be?" Silas answered before Faith had to. "She's staying out at my place." Martha repeated the words as if tasting them. "Staying." Faith stepped forward then, calm and proud despite the color that had risen in her face. "Good morning, ma'am." Martha blinked once, thrown off by the politeness. "Good morning." Faith asked for postage. Her voice stayed steady. She handed over the letter with careful fingers and thanked Martha like she had not noticed the whisper of silence curling around them from every corner of the room. But Silas noticed. He noticed everything. The way Mrs. Grady tilted her head. The way the sister-in-law stared at Faith's dress, then at Silas, then back again. The way Martha Perkins looked almost disappointed that Faith had not stumbled over her words. When they stepped back outside, Silas thought that might be the end of it. Then the whispering began behind the open window. He heard Martha Perkins first. "Maylord or bride?" Another woman let out a low laugh. "Left at the depot like unwanted baggage." Then another voice, softer and meaner. "And living with Silas Mercer alone." More laughter followed. Silas stopped walking. Faith did not. She kept moving down the boardwalk with her back straight, though he could see the handkerchief twisting again in her fist. By the time he caught up beside her at the wagon, her face had gone pale. He helped her up without a word. Then he climbed in beside her and turned the horses home. The whole ride back passed in silence. Dust rose behind the wheels. The valley stretched wide and golden in the afternoon sun. Somewhere far off, cattle moved slow through grass that reached their knees. Everything outside the wagon looked peaceful. Inside it, Faith sat like a woman holding herself together by force. At last Silas said, "They don't matter." Her eyes stayed on the road ahead. "They think I'm a fallen woman," she said. "A fool first, now something worse. That's their business. It becomes mine when they say it out loud." Silas tightened his grip on the reins. He hated that she was right. After a moment she turned and looked at him properly. "You didn't speak for me in there." He frowned slightly. "Should I have?" Faith shook her head. "No, you let me stand on my own feet." Silas held her gaze 1 second longer than he should have. Then he looked back at the road. That night life seemed to settle again, but it was not the same calm as before. Something fragile had changed between them. Not broken, changed. Faith cooked beans and cornbread. Silas fixed the loose hinge on the back door. They ate by lamplight while crickets sang outside in the summer dark. Nothing looked different, but both of them moved with the quiet awareness that the world beyond the cabin had now taken notice. And trouble always found what people noticed. 7 days after the trip to town, old Wilbur Dane rode up with the mail. He rarely stopped at Silas's cabin unless there was something personal worth saying. That morning, his horse looked tired, and his face looked graver than usual. Faith was on the porch trimming dead leaves from the flowers when Wilbur pulled up. His eyes landed on her first, too long. Then he cleared his throat and spoke to Silas. "Bank got robbed last night." Silas straightened from the fence rail he had been fixing. "What?" "Willow Creek Bank. Safe cleaned out. Sheriff's got men riding every direction." Faith went still. Wilbur shifted in the saddle. "Folks are talking," he added. "Said sheriff's questioning anybody new to town these past weeks." His gaze slid toward Faith again. That was enough. Silas's jaw tightened. "If the sheriff wants something, he can come ask me." Wilbur nodded, tipped his hat, and rode on. The yard stayed quiet after he left. Faith set the flower clippings aside one by one, but her hands had begun to tremble. Silas saw it. He walked onto the porch and stood near enough for her to know she was not alone, but not so near that it would feel like pity. "Town talks every time a barn door swings open," he said. Faith looked out toward the road. "That doesn't mean they're wrong this time." He turned sharply. "You saying you know something?" Her eyes widened, hurt flaring there before she covered it. "No." Silas cursed himself at once. He had not meant it the way it sounded, but the question had come too quickly, too sharp. Because doubt, once it enters a house, does not knock politely. It slips under the door. That evening he rode into Willow Creek for liniment for the bay gelding and heard the rest of it from Pete Tucker behind the saloon. Pete kept his voice low. "I'm telling you because your daddy once dragged mine out of a creek drunk enough to drown. Sheriff Jenkins ain't made up his mind. But old Ben Collins swears he saw a woman near the bank after dark. Says she had a small case in her hand." Silas felt the back of his neck go cold. "Ben Collins is half blind." "I know that, you know that, fear don't care." Silas rode home hard. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was low and the windows glowed warm from inside. Supper waited on the table, beans, cornbread, a candle in the center. Faith had even folded a clean cloth beneath the plates. She looked up when he entered and smiled faintly. "You look troubled this morning. Thought a proper meal might help." Silas sat, he ate. He watched her move around the stove and tried to imagine her walking to town in the dark, robbing a bank, coming back through the valley with stolen money hidden in that little valise she once guarded with both hands. The picture would not hold. It did not fit her. And yet the splinter of doubt hurt anyway because it meant somebody else had already placed poison where trust had been growing. That night, long after the lamp had been blown out, Silas stepped onto the porch because sleep would not come. The valley lay quiet under starlight. At first he thought Faith was still inside. Then he saw the shape of her near the far fence. She stood with one hand against the post, her back to him. Her shoulders were shaking. Silas had never seen her cry, not at the station story. Not when she learned James Hollister had lied. Not when the women laughed at her in the store. But now, in the dark where she thought no one could see, she let herself break. Silas stood still in the shadows and felt something deep inside him give way. Not because she looked weak, because she had carried too much for too long without once asking anyone else to help hold it. He believed her. He knew it with a kind of certainty that made the town's gossip feel filthy. But belief would not protect her. Morning came hard. The sun had barely cleared the ridge when hoofbeats sounded on the packed dirt road. Sheriff Harlan rode into the yard with his gray horse lathered from distance. He did not waste time with small talk. Faith stepped into the doorway, flour dusting her apron. Silas moved down from the porch until he stood half a step in front of her without even thinking about it. The sheriff took off his hat. "Ma'am." Then he looked at Silas. "Mind if I ask her a few questions?" Silas's voice came out low and flat. Ask. They stood in the yard while the morning breeze moved through the grass. Harlan opened a small notebook. When did you arrive in Willow Creek? 5 weeks ago, Faith said. September 16th. Where from? Cincinnati. Any one place you hear the night before the robbery. Faith's fingers tightened against her apron. I was here, in this cabin. Harlan lifted his eyes toward Silas. You confirm that? Silas did not hesitate. She didn't leave, not once. The sheriff wrote something down, closed the notebook and tucked it away. I ain't made up my mind, he said, but don't leave the county. Then he leaned a little closer to Silas, voice dropping low enough that Faith should not have heard, though maybe she still did. If I were you, Mercer, I'd sleep with one eye open. When he rode away, the whole yard seemed to go empty. Faith stayed standing where she was, drained white. Silas turned toward her. Faith. But she had already stepped back into the cabin. That night he woke to the sound of cloth rustling. He stepped into the front room and found her kneeling on the floor beside her open valise. The dresses were folded inside. The brush, the handkerchief, the last few things she owned. She was packing. Faith Turner's hands were shaking so badly she could hardly fold the second dress. The little valise lay open on the floor beside her, its corners worn soft from years of carrying too much with too little. The brush was already inside. The handkerchief, too. She had even placed the last small tin of sewing needles in the corner, as if making the whole thing neat might somehow make leaving hurt less. Silas stood in the doorway and looked at her for one long moment before he spoke. What are you doing? Faith did not look up. You know what I'm doing. His voice came out rough. No, I know what it looks like. That ain't the same thing. She pressed her lips together hard, then finally lifted her eyes. The sheriff warned you. He warned me, not you. He warned both of us. Silas stepped into the room. Faith. No, she stood too fast and swayed a little, one hand going to the edge of the table. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Something in him went cold. Harder on who? She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. On you. On the man who opened his door to a stranger in the rain and now has a sheriff riding onto his land asking if he's hiding a thief. You aren't a thief. That doesn't matter if the whole town wants me to be one. Silas stared at her. The lamp on the table threw soft light across her face, and for the first time since she had come into his cabin, she looked as tired as she had the day he found her in the storm. Not from walking, from hoping. If I stay, she said, quieter now, they'll keep looking at you like you've lost your sense. They'll talk, they'll question you, they'll make your life harder for no good reason. I won't do that to you. Silas moved closer. You think I care what Willow Creek says about me? She held his gaze then, and the sadness in her eyes landed deep. I think you should. He stopped. That was not the answer he expected. Faith drew a shaky breath. This land is yours. This cabin is yours. Your family built a life here. I walked in with nothing but lies tied up in a bundle of letters and a name no one in this valley had ever heard before. And now troubles followed me right to your doorstep. She looked down at the valise. I won't be the thing that costs you your place in the world. The words tore through him because she still did not understand. Not really. She still thought leaving would be a kindness. She still thought she was the sort of sorrow a man ought to protect himself from. Silas pulled out the chair and sat down at the table. Sit. Faith blinked. What? Sit down. At first she looked like she might refuse. Then something in his face must have told her he would wait there all night if he had to. Slowly, she came to the table and sat across from him. Silas rose again, poured coffee into 2 cups, and set one in front of her. It was a strange hour for coffee. The cabin was quiet except for the tick of cooling stove iron and the wind brushing softly at the walls. But some conversations belonged to the middle of the night. Conversations that daylight might scare away. Faith wrapped both hands around the cup and stared into the dark surface. Silas sat back down. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Faith whispered, "I used to think there was a reason for everything." He said nothing. "My mother believed that," she went on. "When my father worked too long and came home tired, she said the good Lord was teaching us patience. When the roof leaked, she said maybe it was to remind us to be thankful for the parts still dry. When she got sick, she said maybe suffering made room for grace." Faith swallowed hard. "I tried to believe her. I tried after she died. I tried after my father died the week after. I tried in the factory, when every day felt exactly like the one before it. I even tried when those letters came, because I thought maybe that was the reason. Maybe all the sorrow had been leading me somewhere better." Silas looked at her hands. They were still trembling. "But it was all lies," she said. "And now this. Another town, another accusation, another place where I don't belong." He drew a slow breath. "You belong here." Faith shook her head at once. "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" It was a fair question. Hard, honest, too direct to dodge. Silas leaned back and looked toward the stove for a moment as if the answer might be written somewhere in the coals. Then he gave her something he had not given anybody in years. The truth. "My parents died when I was 14, he said. "Winter fever took my mother first. Father was gone before spring. My older brother held on just long enough to sell most of the land and head east chasing some dream that didn't include me. Left me the cabin and not much else." Faith looked up slowly. Silas kept going. "I nearly lost the place that first winter, didn't know enough, trusted the wrong men in town, thought help always came with a fair price." A bitter half-smile touched his mouth. "Found out otherwise." The lamp flickered between them. "I worked, learned, stopped asking things of people, seemed simpler that way." "And was it?" Silas met her eyes. "No." Faith's breath caught just a little. He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "You think leaving here would save me trouble. Maybe it would. But it would bring back something worse." "What?" She said nothing. "The silence," he finished. Those words hung between them. This time Faith did look like she might cry, not from humiliation, from being understood. Silas's voice softened. "You stay or you go. That is your choice. But don't leave thinking you're doing me some grand kindness. If you leave, it won't be because you saved me. It'll be because you chose to." The room went still again. Faith stared at him a long moment, then lowered her eyes to the coffee cup. A tear finally fell, then another, not wild sobbing, not collapse, just quiet tears that seemed pulled from somewhere very deep. Silas sat where he was and let them come. After a while she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and whispered, "I don't want to leave." What? Those 6 words did something to him he was not prepared for. He nodded once. "Then don't." She stayed. The days after that conversation were not easy, but they were honest. Faith still moved more quietly than before. The fear had not vanished just because Silas had spoken it out loud. But the fear no longer sat alone between them. It had a name now, a shape, and because of that it seemed a little smaller. 2 weeks passed. Faith cooked, cleaned, and tended the flowers that now bloomed gold and purple against the porch rail. Silas fixed a section of fence, patched the barn roof, and kept one careful eye on the road. At night they sat on the porch sometimes, saying little, watching the valley dim beneath the sunset. Their shoulders would nearly touch, then stay that way without either of them moving back. What changed most was not what they said. It was what they no longer hid. Silas no longer pretended. He did not wait for the sound of her footsteps in the morning. Faith no longer carried the valise from room to room. Then one clear morning, Sheriff Harlan came back. Silas saw him from the pasture and was already halfway to the yard when the sheriff swung down from his horse. Something in the man's face looked different this time, not suspicion. Wait. Faith stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. The sheriff took off his hat. "Miss Turner," he said. Then he looked between the two of them and let out a breath. "We caught the men who robbed the bank." Faith went still. Harlan continued. 4 of them holed up near Ridgewater. They confessed to Willow Creek and 2 other towns. There was no woman helping them. Old Ben Collins got it wrong. The person he saw had yellow hair and a red coat, nothing like you. Silas felt something deep in his chest loosen so suddenly it almost hurt. Faith did not move. She did not smile. She did not rush forward asking questions. She simply stood there taking the words in, maybe because she had learned the hard way that relief sometimes arrived dressed too much like another trick. The sheriff lowered his eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said. "We all do." Faith looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered with a calm that carried more pain than anger ever could. "Thank you for telling me." That was all. Harlan nodded, shame plain in his face, then turned and rode away. For a few seconds the yard was silent. Then Faith sat down hard on the porch step like her knees had given up holding her. Silas was beside her at once. She laughed once through tears she had not been able to stop this time. "I kept telling myself not to hope too much." He crouched in front of her. "How'd that work?" She shook her head and covered her mouth, laughing and crying at once. "Poorly." Silas smiled then, a real one, slow and rare. "Good." Word traveled fast. Willow Creek changed its face almost overnight, the way towns do when shame makes people suddenly remember manners. Martha Perkins came first with an apple pie and a look that never quite settled on Faith's eyes. "I thought I'd stop by," she said. Faith stood in the doorway, polite and unreadable. "Thank you, ma'am." Martha shoved the pie dish forward. "Fresh this morning." Silas watched from inside and said nothing. The preacher came next, speaking softly about misunderstanding and Christian grace. Faith told him she appreciated the visit. Nothing more. A letter arrived from old Ben Collins 2 days later. The writing shook across the page. An apology from a man too proud to show his face but not proud enough to stay silent now that he knew the damage he had done. Faith read the letter once at the table, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the valise. Silas noticed and asked, "You keeping it?" She nodded. "I'm not ready to forgive him, but I'm not ready to throw it away either." That answer pleased him more than forgiveness would have. It was honest. Summer deepened. The flowers Faith planted spread bright color along the porch. The cabin no longer felt like a place Silas endured. It felt tended, lived in, shared. One evening, as sunset poured gold across the valley, Faith stepped outside with her hair loose around her shoulders and sat beside him on the porch bench, close enough that their sleeves brushed. For a while they watched the light fade over the land. Then she said quietly, "I used to wonder why that man lied to me." Silas did not ask which man. He knew. Why he wrote all those letters, why he brought me all this way without ever meaning to meet me. The wind moved softly through the grass below. Faith turned her face toward the valley. "I don't wonder anymore." Silas looked at her. "If he had kept his promise," she said, "I would never have come here." His throat tightened. "Reckon not." A smile touched her mouth. "I think I got the better end of the bargain." For a second he could not answer. Then Faith rose, went inside, and came back out carrying the valise. She set it on the bench between them and opened it. Silas watched as she pulled out the last few things tied to Ohio, to the train, to James Hollister, to the woman who had once believed the wrong promise. There was one last letter she had somehow kept tucked into the lining. Without a word, she carried it to the stove just inside the door and fed it to the flame. When she came back, she placed 3 things inside the valise. The handkerchief Silas had given her on the storm night, a dried marigold from the garden, and a folded scrap of paper. Silas glanced at it. "What's that?" Faith smiled softly. "One word." "What word?" She looked him full in the face now. "Home." The stars came out one by one above the valley. Night settled gentle around the cabin. After a while Faith leaned her head against his shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. Silas turned slightly toward her. "You can ask." "Why did you stop for me that day?" He thought about the road, the rain, the sight of her in the mud clinging to what little she had left. Then he answered the only way he knew how. "Don't know," he said, "just did." Faith's smile deepened. "My mother used to say Providence sends people when we need them most," she murmured. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. Silas did not answer with words. He reached for her hand on the bench and laced his fingers through hers. She held on. The valley stretched dark and peaceful below them. The cabin behind them glowed warm through clean windows. The flowers near the porch moved in the night breeze like small living things that had decided to stay. Two people the world had nearly thrown away sat side by side in the quiet, no longer strangers, no longer abandoned, no longer waiting for promises that were never coming. They had built something better than that, something true. And for the first time in a long while, hope did not feel like a lie, it felt like home.